So let's get started. So before we dive into the installer, I wanted to just talk a bit about Atlas. So we created Atlas for our users in government, healthcare, and telecom who wanted to use services of Mapbox.com, but needed to process sensitive or large data sets on a private network or in a completely offline or mixed connectivity environment. And what Atlas enables you to do is use Mapbox.com in your own data center, AKA on-prem. You can use our maps offline or in a remote or distributed system. Also, you can display sensitive or big data that you wouldn't want to necessarily upload to Mapbox.com. This allows you to meet security or compliance needs for your organization. And some fun stuff that just came in the pipeline. Atlas, we recently launched a private preview of Atlas Navigation, and Atlas Navigation brings Mapbox navigation APIs, SDKs, and libraries to self-hosted and offline environments. So some cool use cases that Atlas Navigation enables you to do are deploy a mobile nav app on a private cloud, run routing simulations on a closed or air-gapped network. Also do cool stuff like snap recorded traces of vehicles in a field to a network of roads without exposing any sort of private location data, and much, much more. So we're super excited about Atlas Nav, and looking ahead, we're working on ways to improve the data available within Atlas, as well as building tools to make it easier to bring your own data into Atlas. So after that quick overview, I really want to get into the installer. So that's what we came here to do and what we'll do next. So again, please, if you don't have an Atlas license today, you can go ahead and contact sales at mapbox.com/contact to obtain one. But it's still totally worthwhile if you can't follow along today, at least to familiarize yourself with the steps. So once you do have a license, you can repeat the actions that I will be performing. And here I've linked some resources. We actually have a YouTube recording of the steps for you to follow along afterwards, as well as linking to the Atlas official documentation. So I'm going to have the Atlas docs pulled up as they're a great reference, and also open up the terminal. And those are really the two pieces that we'll be focusing on today. So I'll be running this developer install on a MacBook Pro. I'm just going to get my terminal set, shrink this window a little bit. All right, so for hardware configurations, again, if you're following along now or in the future, we recommend as a minimum these hardware requirements: 2-core CPU, 8 gigs RAM, 60 gigabytes solid state drive for a developer install that we'll be doing today. Obviously, more upping these hardware configs if you're on a production instance, but the purpose of today is to try out Atlas on a developer instance. So we have a few dependencies that we'll need to install to get started. The first is Homebrew, and to follow along, I'll pull up the dependencies in our documentation. So with Homebrew, if you don't have that on your machine, you can grab that by going to their official website, brew.sh. And from here, right on the front page, you can copy this installer script and paste it into your terminal and hit enter. And this prompts us to let us know what Homebrew will be installing. For the purposes of time today, I already have Homebrew installed, and I won't run through that process again. So I won't press return to continue, but by all means, go for it, install it on your side. It should take a few minutes to install, not too long. So I'm going to cancel out that for myself. And lastly, we'll just need to install just a few more dependencies that we can do via Homebrew. And these are wget, OpenSSL, install, and PV. You can read up about what these dependencies do, not too much in the documentation, but to keep us rolling, the command that you'll run in your terminal, now that using Homebrew, is brew install. wget, OpenSSL, unzip, PV. Again, I'm not going to execute this to save us some time, but it should be pretty fast for you to get up and running, installing those dependencies. Great, so those are the only dependencies we had to install via the terminal. Next up is we want to install Docker, the Docker desktop application, which we can grab that by going to docker.com. And maybe I'll take a quick pause here as I am flying through. If anyone had questions, I will pause for a moment before I keep going. I noticed I was going a little fast.
It's looking like we have no questions yet in the chat.
Okay, awesome.
Going great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, anyone feel free to pause at any time. There's a lot to cover, so I'm trying to balance a way to inform you, but also we'll keep the ball rolling. So Docker is a tool that allows you to create, deploy, and run applications by using containers. So these containers allow us to package up an application such as Atlas with all the parts it needs and deploy it however you see fit. That could be using Kubernetes on a Minikube or EKS, or deploying to AWS with an EC2. Today, we're doing a local developer install, but that's the beauty of why we use Docker for this. And to install the desktop app, we'll click the Get Started button. And from here, we can install Docker Desktop. Again, for me today, it's going to be on a Mac computer. That should take a few moments to download. And again, I do have Docker installed on my machine, but if you're downloading for the first time, you'll get a DMG file. And from here, we can go through the process of, you would drag the Docker app to your applications folder and launch it. So pretty straightforward application if you're following along now and doing that. All right, so for Docker, I have this on my dock. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch it briefly to just show you some of the recommended settings for Atlas that we want to set. So when you launch Docker, if you're a new user to Docker, in the top right of your screen, you'll see a little animated Docker logo letting us know that Docker Desktop is starting. So we'll just give that a few minutes to get ready, and it's orange. Once it turns green, we know that it is completely launched. It will just give that another moment. Cool. So now Docker is green, and I do have an instance running on another machine. Is I don't want to make any of this call the too sluggish, as Docker does use up resources, but what I wanted to quick show you all is you can set preferences in Docker by clicking on the preferences option. And here's some that we recommend. So under general, I recommend unchecking start Docker desktop when you log in. It will prevent it from booting up each time you log into your machine, which is nice. And as per the Atlas docs, we specify that here too, but just want to remind you all that set 2-core CPU, 4 gigs memory, and then 32 gigs for your disk image size. Again, that's for a dev install. If you want to make that larger, you have other projects going on, please do so. But these are recommended settings. So once you do that, you can apply and restart those changes. All right, so for now, I'm going to quit Docker Desktop to keep things going speedy live on webcam. But we're super close to getting to the Atlas installer. The next step we want to do is via mapbox.com. So if you log into your mapbox.com account, as we mentioned earlier, to follow along, you will need an Atlas license. So if you do not have an Atlas license, you won't see this Atlas link right here, but we'll go to the Atlas page, and if anyone wants to pause for questions, I might have seen some traffic coming in.
Yes, so we got a question actually asking how long an Atlas trial license would last. I'm happy to take that one for you, Brittany.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. So with our Atlas trials, the best way to think about it is we want to make sure it's best for your use case. We're going to go through a different series of questions just to see what you'd be needing in terms of our different Atlas offerings, in terms of the data provided and what you're looking to test. So it's not like a cookie cutter, here, fill out this form, you'll get a trial for X amount of days, and then at the end of it, we'll hand you over a bill. It's a little bit more of a hands-on experience where we're working through it with you and making sure this is actually a fit for you and your environment.
Cool. All right. And I'll keep my eye on the questions as well. Okay, so yeah, so you will see this download page if you do have the Atlas license key, but before we download the file, what we want to do is, and you may have done this before if you've used other Mapbox products, is we want to generate a access token for Atlas. So if you log into the main dashboard of mapbox.com, your main account page, if you scroll down, you can click on this create token button. And from here, we can create a token for Atlas. So I've already created one called Atlas Server. Pretty much name it anything that's meaningful to you so you'll remember it and be able to reference. Since I already have Atlas Server, I'll just call this one Atlas. And for the scopes, so the only scope we'll need to check whenever you get to this step or if you're following along is the Atlas read scope. We can go ahead and check any public scopes that may have been set by default. Just for security purposes, principle of least privilege, we just want to set the scope that we need for these purposes. So fortunately, that's just one, and it's Atlas Read. So once you name your token, check Atlas Read scope, you're really all set to go, and you can click the Create Token button. And of course, we will type in our password so we can confirm that. Great, so we get this little modal that says a check mark, we've created the token. So I have a few tokens going on, Atlas Server, which I created prior, but this was the new Atlas token that we just created. And obviously you see my token on this screen for security purposes. I will be removing it after this demo. So that goes to say, whenever you create a token, you want to not share it with anyone. You want to save it in a secure location so you can access it again. As per this modal, you won't be able to see the token after leaving this page. So you can go ahead and copy it and save it to a secure app, something like 1Password or whatever secure location that suits you. So you can go ahead and grab this key at a later date. But for now, I already have a token generated prior, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete the one that I just created. If you accidentally close out of this page, you can always go back and create a new token if you lost yours. All right, so the last item is we just are going to download the Atlas installer and get rolling. So if we go back to that Atlas page that I had up a bit earlier, we can go ahead and download the installer file. We're going to select the latest 1.4.0 and then download for Mac as we're on a MacBook Pro. So we'll click the download button. It should be a super fast install, just 16.2 megabytes.
While that's downloading, we have a question.
Awesome.
Okay, so lots of POIs are changing right now due to COVID-19. World data is more dynamic than ever before. How do I update Atlas data from Mapbox? Can I use my own data sets and search services on Atlas?
Yes, that's a great question. So with Atlas, due to the nature of it being on-premise, like hence the baked-in security, it's up to your disclosure what you can share. So anything like local, any sort of like sensitive data that you want to share with your users is at your discretion. So you can update that data. You can, once we get into the Atlas install, I'd be happy to show how we can add in custom items such as MB tiles, etc. But yeah, and anything, Erica, if you wanted to elaborate on.
Yeah, no, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. The joy of it being on your infrastructure is you can add what you want. So feel free to do so.
Awesome, great question. All right, so now that we have the zip downloaded, you could unzip this via the terminal, but for our purposes, we can just double click the zip file to extract the contents. And so one thing I recommend is that we move this unzipped executable to a meaningful location so we can access it later. I personally am not a fan of like leaving a ton of things in my downloads folders. I might lose them. So what I recommend, if you're following along, is to make a new folder, maybe in your documents, wherever you see fit, and you could call it Atlas. You can name this whatever you want, but it's just so you can find the installer at a later point in time and not have to hunt back into your downloads folder. So we can go ahead and drag that unzipped file to our newly created folder. And now we're going to go ahead and launch the installer wizard. I know it's been a lot of steps, but I think after watching this, and if you do this on your own, it will be super speedy. It can seem like a lot of moving pieces at first. I do understand that. All right, so now that we have this newly created directory, we can go back to our terminal where we'll launch the Atlas installation wizard. So I'm just gonna give us some more space in our terminal. And we're going to cd or change directory into that folder that we just created. So we can do that by change directory to, that was in my documents folder, and then I made that newly created Atlas folder. Cool. And then if we do an ls here, we can, so say I need to check verify that yes, in fact, the installer does live there. And I'm going to zoom in a bit so everything is more readable for us. Awesome. So now that we're in that directory, what we do is type /atlas. And if you just type that, and then you hit the tab button, that will auto populate the name of the installer. In the Mapbox docs, you might just see Atlas installer because there's many different versions of the Atlas installer, but here we want to be mindful that we key into what the title is. This is macOS 64-bit 1.4.0. And after we grab that file name, we simply type the install command. And this will, well first, if this looks familiar to folks, I'm on Catalina. You may have seen this before with other applications. For security purposes, we need to authorize that, yes, we do in fact want to install the software. So sometimes these steps can be a little tricky, but folks hopefully have been used to this with other apps. You can open up your general security preferences pane. And from here, what we can do is just make sure that we say, yes, we want to go ahead and allow this install. So we'll click allow anyway. All right. And then what we can do is just I'll hit the up key in my terminal to just say, hey, I want to run this install command again, press return. And then this time, yes, we do in fact want to install Atlas. Yay. And we have the Atlas install wizard appear on the screen. And I'll try to get the font readable. Let me know if anyone's having trouble reading this. But from here, we're super close to being done. We can read through the installation steps, and this will guide us along the way of what kind of install we want to do. So we'll just be answering a series of a few yes or no questions, and then starting the download, and we're good to go. So first question, do you plan to run Atlas on this machine? Yes, I do. You can just type Y for yes. And here is where we want to enter in the secret token that we had saved before. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that from my 1Password app. You can grab that wherever you saved it. Go ahead and paste that in. It will be hidden for security purposes. Cool, and then from here, we will select which Atlas version we want to download. We want to download the latest production instance, which is 2.6.0, and you'll see it says latest. So again, if we're just answering yes to these, you can hit the return key. And here is where we decide what data we want to download. And you can navigate this command line by arrowing up and down and hitting the space key to select different items that you may want or may not want. So it's really up to you what data you want to install. To keep this a light developer instance for now, I'm going to just check the Docker images, which houses Atlas, as well as this Mapbox Streets tile set. This should take, depending on connectivity speed, about maybe 15 to 25 minutes to download. So keeping it light for now. So I'll press return. And the next one to keep this light is the installer's asking us if we want to download development data or production. Again, we'll keep it light and download dev data. If you're curious about the file sizes based on your machine, our documentation provides how large all of these tile sets are in dev versus production. So we'll say yes to that. And for here, where do you plan to install Atlas? So here, we want to do this on my local machine. If you want to test stuff out in a different way on your own, you can download the files here, but then transfer them to an air-gapped network or machine of some sort. But for now, if you're just following along with the dev one, want to keep it simple, straightforward, we can just install this to my computer. It will create a folder called Atlas Server, and we'll hit return. And now the downloading begins. And in a few seconds, I'm going to cancel this and we're going to take a look at Atlas. But if you're following along, this should take, again, like 15, 25 minutes. And just so you could leave your terminal running and check back on that. With that, I'm going to cancel, and I have Atlas running on another machine, and we'll boot it up. But I can pause there and just log on to my other machine if any questions come up in the meantime.
Awesome. We had a question that actually I can tackle. Someone
Awesome.
internally asked, are all of these upgrades, are they included with your license fee, or are they an extra charge? In terms of thinking of this in two different ways. If you are looking to update your data at different frequencies, that's going to have a different charge. And if you're looking to add in search, boundaries, navigation, that's also going to be an additional charge. It's something where we work through with the trial, with the licensing, making sure it's the right data and right amount for your use case. So we'll work with you to determine what the best refresh rates on the data will be and what the best add-ons for your use case will be. But yes, they are an additional charge. You can pick them a la carte.
Cool, great question. All right, so I just remotely connected to my other laptop running. If everyone can see this screen, I'm gonna maximize it. So here, I have Atlas running. For the sake of time, I wanted to prep that for you all. But once that command line that we ran has completed, this is what you'll see. So in the documents folder, where we made that Atlas folder, we now, along with that installer executable, we see two new folders, and this is all of the data that we just downloaded, which is really cool. So now we can see that you can dive into these files, and this will house all of like the Docker files, all of the tile sets, etc. And to get Atlas running, we'll want to change directory in to the Atlas directory we created, and then change directory into this Atlas server folder. So if I look at my terminal, I have done that. And the script, once you're in that directory, you just want to run atlas.sh start, and that's going to kick off all of those Docker images being containerized and up and running for you. So that should take several moments. It looks like we have 15 containers total running in my instance. But once all of that is complete, you'll get this message. I can zoom in a little bit. That tells us Atlas is ready to run on localhost, which is awesome. So in Chrome, we can pull up localhost and we have Atlas running, which is super neat. So now we can, yay! Thank you all for going on that journey with me. The more times you install Atlas, it can be a lot more speedy. But yeah, so now Atlas is running, which is great. And you can dive into the various suite of items that we have, such as Studio and Kepler GL. I know we're getting close to the half hour, and I wanted to show a front end example that I think is really neat that's included in our documentation that we shared. But I can, as I set that up, I can pause for questions.
Yes, we have a Atlas nav question. Someone is looking to learn a little bit more about the navigation services available with Atlas.
Yeah, definitely. So I shared a bit of that earlier. I don't have anything visual that I can show right now, like nothing fun in the GUI, unfortunately. But if you do seek the private preview of the nav, you can go to town with it. But the different like services included, our nav enables us to deploy like a mobile navigation app on a private cloud or simulate routing. And something really cool too is if you want to do things like calculate number of patients within a 30-minute drive of a healthcare facility, just making it relevant to daily things happening, you can do all of that with the navigation APIs. So yeah, apologies, I don't have a visual representation now, but that you can dive in completely to those APIs and SDKs and libraries with Atlas as you please.
Awesome. Yeah, and for folks that are listening in right now, I'm going to drop my email into the chat. So if you have further questions about Atlas Nav or maybe even try to get a trial, feel free to reach out to me and we'll work together to see what we can do.
Awesome, very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to see the projects that come up with that. It's gonna be really neat. Cool. All right, so revisiting that front end challenge. So let's go back to, just gonna do some screen switching. Let's go back to that, yeah, our Google Doc here. So actually there's something fun you can do along with us, even if you don't have an Atlas license at the moment, and you're just hopping in to listen, you can take a look at these instructions down here. And this is a front-end example where you'll be creating an index.html file and pasting in some code and then running it in a browser. So we link to an example that you can go to in our Mapbox docs, and this involves adding a GeoJSON line to a map. And GeoJSON, that's this like gray artifact here. So that's like, GeoJSON is adding features including like points, lines, or strings, or polygons in a JSON format, JavaScript object notation to a map. So with this example, we'll be adding in this GeoJSON line to a map. And again, if you don't have Atlas and you're just hopping on to listen, you could try this code snippet out. You can copy this snippet into whatever text editor you prefer and run it in Chrome. So I'm going to go back to my machine that has Atlas on it. I'm running VS Code to paste in this. You could use any text editor you like, whether that's like Atom, Sublime Text, or just a plain text editor. And trying to zoom in a bit so it's readable, but I've pasted in that HTML code snippet. And as per the notes in the resource, the cool thing is we can replace the script and the link tags that we're pointing to Mapbox APIs on the World Wide Web, but we want to point it to local hosts. So we can like run this just on my machine. If I was in the middle of a desert and I didn't have access to any internet, I could run this map, which is super neat. So what I've done here in the script tag, I've replaced the .com APIs with localhost. So now that that is saved, I place this HTML file, oops, lots of windows, on my desktop just to show you. We can launch that. I made a folder called front end example, call it whatever you'd like. This is my index.html file. Double click that. And yay, like our map is loading. And this is all local to my computer. So if we open up the Chrome DevTools, just to further show that point, if I hit the refresh, we get all of our network traffic that's happening. And if I filter out by just local, we can see that those two files, the GL JavaScript file, as well as the CSS, are in fact running locally. But again, yeah, you can, if you don't have Atlas spun up, running that code is a fun example to get you introduced in exploring Mapbox. But yeah, that ends my front-end challenge demo. Happy to go through questions or explore the dashboard or anything that makes sense to folks.
That's awesome. I love that you're able to open it up and see exactly where it's coming from, and just the fact that something so powerful is able to live on your server is just great. So excellent demo.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, we got a question. What are the most common use cases for Atlas? Brittany, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I could take a stab, but we could tag team it for sure if you have any thoughts that come to mind. Not
sure.
to put you on the spot too. The common use cases would really be if your product or your organization or your setup, whatever your needs are, if they are on some sort of like firewalled network, or you don't have internet connectivity, rightfully so, for good reason, for security purposes. So the use cases of Atlas, we see it a lot with like telecom, healthcare, government. It doesn't have to be that, it could be totally other use cases, but in those sectors, security is valued, big data is valued. So that's why I would say common use cases are with those industries where you want to really have control and ownership of your Mapbox suite of resources at your disposal, rather than relying on .com APIs. You can have the control over it.
Yeah, and just to echo that, if you are currently working in a location where maybe you're using Tableau or Power BI, and you really want to be able to do that very, very powerful data viz analysis, but you need it to be on premise, that's something also that Atlas can help out with. I know a lot of different institutions, whether that's finance, whether that's healthcare, are kind of constrained with what they're able to do with the data. So having this on your own server, on your own instance, really makes it easier for you to actually start running some analysis with the data that you already have, without really making anything unsecure. Not that Mapbox.com isn't secure, but it's more about this will live within your own infrastructure, so there won't be any worries from your IT team. So yeah, there's a lot of different use cases. It's safe to say, I mean, I'm a firm believer that anyone could use Atlas if you have security concerns, but definitely the big ones you see, like Brittany mentioned, are going to be like healthcare, finance, telecom, government. Think of the really big industries with the really sensitive data.
Yeah, or if you feel like going into the desert alone and
Yes,
using Atlas, you can totally do that
yes,
just for fun. If you want to go
yeah.
exploring somewhere, you'll have these maps available to you. And what you see on the screen now is, again, all this is running locally. If you're familiar with Mapbox Studio, which you can test out on mapbox.com, this is all running locally on my machine. So with Atlas, you have access to Studio to visually design maps, as well as from the API perspective that I showed with that front end demo.
Awesome. Yeah. And also to piggyback off of the going into the desert, you could take Atlas Mini. Is that the right term for it? And you could take that with you. So there's lots of options. So we have another question, which is what are the storage requirements for the most common Atlas layers? How easy is it to apply different layers from Studio to offline data in Atlas? And if rather large, how easy would it be to clip out the data for just needed areas of interest? The big one.
Cool. All right. This is like an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking. So I don't have specific numbers memorized, so I'm just going to take a sneak peek back at the docs real fast. But if we go to the official Mapbox Atlas docs that I linked, that will tell us, which is, let me just read through your question, all of the sizes of files. And in terms of commonality, Erica, I don't know if you'd have more insight into that. I would say, you know, with all of the different tile sets that can be downloaded, really whatever would meet the needs of the organization. Like we have trains, streets, satellite, boundaries, etc. I don't know if you had thoughts on common.
Yeah, well, from my own personal experience trying to download the entire production layers onto my MacBook Pro, I would not recommend that. I would recommend something a little bit hardier for that. Otherwise, it will eat up every single inch of space and memory that you have and will take about forever. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it really is contingent industry to industry. Big one that we see is search. So I'd say probably the most common ones that I run into are going to be search, satellite, streets, and terrain sometimes. Boundaries is definitely something where it's a little bit more of understanding the use case. But really, I could comfortably say that I've worked with folks that have needed every single layer.
Awesome,
So
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking as well, but great question. And yeah, so let's dive into the next pieces of the question. So how easy is it to apply different styles from Studio to offline data in Atlas? Again, great question. So I'm just going to hop back over to my Atlas instance. So if we go to our instance of Atlas server, which I briefly showed before, from here, you know, we kind of got a lot of files happening. I'll zoom in a bit. But for example, for Mapbox tiles, here we can see that I just downloaded Streets v7 as we were talking about. It was a light install. Custom MB tiles, they can be dragged, just simple drag and drop, and then they will be loaded so you can access custom tile files. But I think this is a great question that could warrant following up after this call, because I feel like it's super thought out question and I want to make sure we're covering all use cases. But yes, you can definitely drag in custom data and then that will launch on your server instance. And lastly, if rather large, how easy it would be to clip out data for just the needed areas of interest. So I don't have a direct answer for the clipping out of data. I immediately thought of boundaries, which you can add to Atlas, which I don't have. I did not download the data to data demo, but boundaries would be based on postal codes. You could divide up the data, but I feel like clipping out, that's not exactly what you're asking. So I'd be happy to, we could follow up on that question unless Erica, you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can chime in there. I've worked with a few folks that have needed like a very, very light version of Atlas. So it is a conversation that we can have. To be candid, we generally don't do it. But like I said, we're really flexible with making sure that everyone has access to the tools that they need. So if you're working on a use case and say you only need a sliver of a specific region, or you're looking for, satellite only for this part, we can be really flexible with you. We don't want anything to be a hurdle. But there are some limitations there that I don't have off the top of my head. But Stephen, I want to assume your name is. If you want to shoot me an email afterwards, I'm happy to dive deeper into that and pull Brittany and myself in for another call with you.
Cool.
Good stuff. Oh, and we have another question. Does an Atlas license include unlimited users/seats?
Yeah, Eric, if you want to take that, I'd
Yeah.
be happy to.
Yeah, do you want to go from the technical side of the limitations of the number of users, and then I can kind of hit on a little bit in terms of the API limitations?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so with Atlas, we have, and again, happy to follow up if it's a more specific use case with you, but we have Atlas Standard and Atlas Enterprise. So rate limits can be scaled by adding additional instances within Atlas Enterprise, but not in Standard. Atlas Enterprise allows you to go past default rate limit setting. Right now, we have actually, what I failed to show you, but I believe the question involved login and whatnot. So now we have a config file set. I apologize, I didn't show this earlier. It was just cached, but for sign-in, we have set default credentials in a config file that you can overwrite with your own credentials as you see fit. But as you spin up Atlas for the first time, by default, it's Atlas user. Password is the word password. Again, for security purposes, you can modify these in your Atlas instance, give you that ownership over it. But this would be the credentials to sign on. There's no sort of single sign-on. In the future, we'd love to hear improvements on unique features that folks would like. But hopefully that answered somewhat of the question, and I can pass that off to Erica.
Yeah, and in terms of, because I know a lot of folks when they're thinking about Mapbox at large are like, okay, how many users do I have? How many map loads is this going to generate? Should I go in a seats-based model? The best way to think about Atlas is we are not metering you. We don't have access to see what you're doing because it is on your premise. So in terms of the actual API usage, we're not metering that, so there's not really any hard limits around that. So yeah, that would be the answer in terms of the side of thinking about users and seats and map loads from the API side opposed to the number of users side. Hopefully that answered the question from both angles.
Cool.
Awesome. And it looks like we're at the 3-minute mark. Any other questions from the crowd? I have a fun question. Brittany, I know you're newer to the Mapbox team over here. What's one of your favorite Atlas implementations you've seen so far?
Ooh,
Without, breaking any NDAs.
yeah, right, because like we totally like want to be mindful of that. We just see if I have any like fun things to think about. So yeah, as we mentioned, typically Atlas is used around like government or anything with secure data. So I really can't like share too much, but I can say that but that being said, I did think about some stuff in advance. So we do have major telecom customers, and a use case is monitoring like network signal strength. So kind of going along something like that is, and something enlightening to me too, just joining Mapbox is you think of maps, you just think of like location of like, where am I? Okay. But also you could monitor things like network signal strength or other things like, I mean, sadly, we've seen a lot of the COVID maps, and it's like at a time like this, but it's just thinking about not just data is a location or driving or walking, but showing data, other kinds of data that you can monitor, like outages of networks or health crises and things like that on a map, as opposed to just what you initially think of. But yeah, we also have customers, I think Erica, you mentioned, that integrate with analytics like Tableau, Power BI. So we can follow up with more info if that's something you're curious about. But I would say that those are two cool use cases that just show like integrations in unique ways.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for answering my question. I had to ask.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good question too.
Dom, feel free to chime in with your favorite Atlas implementation.
No, I
Love
got
to
to
hear it
chime
from you.
in with it's 12:45, and that was a
Ah,
fabulous session. Really, really good questions and answers. Thank you both and you got through the install. So congratulations.
Yeah, that was
on
awesome.
That was fabulous. So I think folks know what they need. Erica, maybe drop your email address in the chat
yes.
one more time in case folks want to reach out to you. And thanks everybody for joining us today. That was a great session. And we'll be back here again for the storytelling template with Stephen Gasons next week on Lunchbox.
Woo.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.